There is perhaps no ship in history as famous as the Titanic. It of course famously sank on her maiden voyage on April 15, 1912. Just 710 passengers were saved, while 1,496 people perished. It was, by all accounts, an enormous tragedy and has become infamously known around the world. The story since, however, has been romanticized and is still very much in the public consciousness even to this day, over 110 years later. With all of that sustained interest, there have been several attempts to rebuild this iconic ocean liner. My name is Jake, and in this episode of Cancelled, we're going to look at just that. From insane ideas of the past, to some that made it very close to fruition, and even to some that are actually happening right now. This is the, so far, never built Titanic II. This episode of Cancelled is sponsored by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use the code BSF16 to get up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Even at the beginning, Titanic was never really alone. She was, after all, the sister ship of the RMS Olympic and later the RMS Britannic. Really, all 3 sister ships were nearly identical apart from minor differences. Titanic and Britannic famously sank shortly after their launch, leaving just the Olympic to live out a full-service career. Indeed she did, and was finally scrapped in 1935. The Olympic class of ships had now been erased, and any tangible sailing legacy of the Titanic no longer existed. For decades, all sorts of pretty out there ideas were proposed, perhaps most famously by Clive, who wrote a novel called Raise the Titanic in 1976. That was adapted into a pretty bad movie in 1980. The whole thing was based on a concept that would turn out to be impossible after the wreck was finally found in 1985. Since, of course, the wreck is in 2 pieces. It wouldn't be until 1997 when the ship in the story was once again thrusted into the popular culture. James Cameron's film Titanic supercharged a whole new fascination for the luxury ocean liner, and apparently brought the idea of resurrecting it to a whole new level. In 1998, a South African businessman named Cyril Gose had plans to build a nearly exact replica of the original ship at the cost of $500 million. It would be equipped with the latest technology, enough lifeboats for everyone on board, and feature some modern ship designs like bow thrusters, diesel engines, and a bulbous bow. From the outside though, the ship would appear nearly exactly the same as it did in 1912. This was made public in a 1998 issue of Popular Mechanics, and even made the front page. But he wasn't alone. There was also a company based in Switzerland who were working at building their very own replica ship. Cyril said he could begin as soon as 1999, and the Switzerland company claimed that they could have their ship finished by 2002. Both projects, however, just fizzled away. Cyril tried to fundraise money in 2000 with little success. By 2006, he had officially canceled the project. It wouldn't be until around the 100-year anniversary of the sinking that someone would try to renew this concept once again. This time, it was from quite the character in Australia named Clive Palmer. Now, he's a rather polarizing figure, and has had his fingers in some truly weird projects in the past. Despite whatever you may think of him, he certainly does have the money and political power to make things happen, with his net worth somewhere around $2 billion. With an apparent fascination for the Titanic and perhaps some inspiration from Cyril Gose's project back in the 90s, Palmer announced the Titanic II in a press conference tour around major cities. Palmer's idea was the most fleshed out, and over the course of 2013, quite a bit of information was released not only about how this was all going to happen, but also on the ship itself. Immediately upon first glance, this concept has some striking differences. Of course, many of the iconic design cues remain in place, basically the entire superstructure and aesthetic design of the vessel. One noticeable difference, though, is the inclusion of an entire, quote, safety deck, which would essentially house modern lifeboats and their rigging. This deck would also feature undisclosed new common area spaces for passengers. According to these very early and preliminary general arrangement schematics for the project, cabins would be enlarged for their very own private bathrooms. Air conditioning would now run throughout the ship, while many of the staples of the Olympic-class liners like the indoor swimming pool, squash court, grand staircases, lounges, and dining rooms would all be meticulously recreated. While some spaces would be modernized where it made sense, other areas like the radio room, original lifeboats, and many of the outdoor deck spaces would be nearly identical to the original ship, allowing passengers to sail a comfortable yet authentic museum-like experience. Rising above the top decks would be 4 funnels. This time, the first 2 forward would serve no purpose for engine exhaust. Instead, they would house a double-decker observation deck with large windows allowing for a pretty unique view. Obviously, since these 2 forward funnels served no technical purpose, the space below decks would be freed up for other modern ship infrastructure like water treatment facilities and crew accommodations. Speaking of the mechanical aspects of the ship, despite it adopting a hull from the early 1900s, it would feature all the modern equipments like bow thrusters, diesel engines, and even azipod thrusters. The ship would sail under Palmer's newly created company, Blue Star Line, and with historians, naval architects, and even the great-great-nephew of Bruce Ismay, the original owner of the White Star Line, who was now on their advisory board. Really, this project seemed to have had some legs. But when most people hear about something like this, especially right after the Costa Concordia accident, one obvious concern comes to mind, and that's how safe is this actually going to be? Palmer and his team clearly had prepared for that mindset, as they consistently reiterated their talking points in their press events. To their credit, the ship was being designed from the ground up in our modern era of shipbuilding and regulation, so aspects of navigation are much more sophisticated, and failures in the riveted hull of the original ship would not apply to this, as the superstructure of Titanic II would be welded together. The total estimated price for all of this was somewhere around $400 to $600 million. Titanic II was set to sail in 2016 following the original and intended voyage between Southampton and New York City. Other itineraries would include taking it around the world, even visiting Asia and Australia too. Progress towards that 2016 date seemed to have actually been happening too, as a contract with a Chinese shipyard was signed and the company claiming they had begun the final stages of design work. In September 2013, model work to investigate the efficiency of their hull design was also conducted. This indicated they were getting very close to laying down steel. But then came delays, as funding from investors didn't seem to have materialized as they hoped. In 2014, Blue Star Line signed a deal with a Chinese company which would essentially go out and try and find potential sponsors for the project, and thus Palmer announced construction would begin in September of the same year. A new sail date was now revised to 2018. This date, though, was also missed. In 2015, the company applied for government funding, which was soon denied. Trouble continued to follow the project as Palmer's primary source of his wealth, his mining company, had found that around $6 million was taken out of their corporate accounts and used for the development and marketing on the Titanic II project. Palmer and his Chinese partners also began payment disputes, which just slowed everything down. Suddenly, their social media pages went silent, and it seemed as though the project was dead. That was until 2018, when everything sprang back to life. A new video detailing the specifications of Titanic II was released, for some reason on Palmer's political YouTube channel, which hilariously has this description reading, "The latest update for the Titanic II project, which has been reinvigorated by Australian business leader and national living treasure Clive Palmer." Still, this video didn't really give an update, rather just delivered the same information everyone already knew. But still, new agreements with maritime management companies were being signed, and yet another completion date was now set for 2022. But I'm sure you can see where this is once again going. In 2020, Palmer was charged with fraud, among other things relating to his mining businesses. This also coincided with him running for public office, which also didn't exactly work out. In 2022, he apparently suffered from a rather serious medical emergency while on the political trail. While he is still alive, the state of the Titanic II appears it is not. The brand's official social media accounts have not made any updates regarding the project since 2019, which really hasn't been the most professional handling of the situation, especially for those who have invested into the project. But really, none of this was all that professional to begin with. While the global launch of Titanic II was impressive, and the initial renderings and schematics seem to have shown a genuine, realistic commitment to this project, the PR execution in the later half was anything but.
What do you say to people that say this is just a big hoax, you haven't signed a contract, this is just, publicity seeking?
Well, I just say it's bullshit, really.
With a mere 5,000 followers on their Twitter page, the unverified company account would tweet out such bangers as, "I posted 3 photos on Facebook in the album Shipyard," and also for some reason tweeted this photo from Clive Palmer's personal Twitter. Okay? The Facebook side wasn't much better, as in February 2020 they posted this, saying there'll be an update later this year. That didn't happen. Instead, there were 2 posts basically advertising Palmer's political position. The official website was also suspended, and this is what their Blue Star Line website looks like. So it really seems like Palmer's dream of a Titanic II is cancelled. Unless there's a sudden influx of lots of investor money, or he's willing to take a $500 million risk and gamble it all on a ship and who knows how much more in company infrastructure, the project is most likely underwater. But that's not the only replica Titanic proposed. In fact, there's one under construction right now. Sort of. While Palmer was touting his new project to the world in 2013, a resort in Asia called Romandacy announced their very own Titanic project. It's located in the Sichuan province of China, deep into the country, and is planned to be a large resort and theme park, with its main attraction being a 1-to-1 full-sized replica of the Titanic. This also didn't start out with smooth sailing, as the owners had promised whatever they considered to be an iceberg simulator. Rightfully so, people found this to be in poor taste and it was scrapped. But otherwise, work began in early 2015, and if marketing is to be believed, this will be the definitive Titanic replica. At least from the outside, and according to them, it will be built to the highest level of accuracy. Unlike Palmer's Titanic, however, this one will be fixed in place. Not an actual operating ship, but a standing replica in the landlocked province of China. But with financial trouble becoming a theme in this video, they too were affected. As work very slowly drew on, in some cases the site would sit dormant for months, even years at a time. The preview center began to decay as little progress was being made. Apparently, the developers were having quite a difficult time finding the money to keep the project going. By 2021, only 8 decks had been fabricated and constructed. Relatives of Titanic and even nearby citizens alike are not all that happy about the project, and there have been rumors of workers not even being paid. So all in all, the project is just tied up in so much controversy. That 2021 report was the last the public has heard about the project, and as far as we know, the hull of the Chinese Titanic is sitting abandoned in the middle of Asia. So I guess the moral of this story is maybe don't build something purely to romanticize a ship where 1,496 people died a horrific death. With that being said, there is something symbolically compelling about seeing a refined modern version of the great ocean liner finally sailing into New York. It's a captivating concept, and as someone who has a great personal interest in the iconic ship, it's something I would genuinely like to see. But on the flip side, it's just not being done in the way it should. Without the proper money, it could quickly turn out to be a flop and a huge embarrassment. It already sort of is. Titanic II will most likely not happen, at least by the hands of Palmer, and it will likely take an equally eccentric billionaire to make it a reality. But even then, it still requires investment, and our current market is not really set up for a product like this. Not to mention, if you were an investor, would you put your money down for a project who has a website that looks like this? Over in China, well, they're certainly the closest to making something like this happen, but their Titanic is only a replica on the outside. They have made no effort to restore the interiors as they were, and will most likely be a rather crude interpretation of the era with modern hotel rooms, since its main function is to be a hotel. Developers in China don't exactly have the best track record with building authentic recreations, so without concept art, who knows what it'll look like. But even so, if they're not building a complete replica for people to see what the ship was like keel to funnels, then what's even the point? Honestly, the only perfect Titanic II would have been the RMS Olympic. Unfortunately, at the time, the foresight wasn't there and a business decision was made to scrap her. If she was saved like the Queen Mary, we'd have a great museum of the Olympic-class liners from the past. Really though, there is no perfect Titanic II, and all of these insane cancelled plans of the past have shown that. But maybe that's for the best. Maybe there should only be one Titanic, one that lives in history not as an aspirational retooling of our past to sell tickets, but one that just stands as a story, a lesson of hubris and human failure. Despite us likely never sailing on Titanic II, you still can dine with class with this video sponsor, HelloFresh. Making your own food, especially when it's delicious, is a fulfilling and educational experience. HelloFresh allows you to do that while also cutting down on food waste and excess packaging. I hate throwing uneaten food away, especially ingredients that were not portioned just right for my meal. HelloFresh provides everything you need to whip up some genuinely tasty meals across their wide variety of choices. I love shrimp, so their seasoned shrimp and roasted potatoes were fantastic. I also learned how to better cook shrimp in a pan. So if all of that sounds good to you, go to HelloFresh.com and use the code BSF16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. I hope you enjoyed the return of Cancelled, and if you have an idea for what I should cover next, leave a comment below and consider subscribing to my channel. My name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.